Welcome back to Blurred Summits. Today we have Sam Demma. Sam Demma is a youth speaker, a personal coach, and an entrepreneur. He started a nonprofit organization called Pick Waste and has given 2 TEDx talks. Thank you so much for coming on with us today, Sam.
Abdul, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So just to get started, for people who might not know who you are, if you could describe who Sam is in one sentence, what would you say?
I think I right now describe myself as a creative and a speaker. I try and create things that impact young people, whether that's writing, spoken word poetry, speaking, podcasting, and I've been doing it full time for the past 3 years.
Awesome. And so one of the speeches that kind of connected us together was one of the TEDx talks that you gave where you started this initiative called #OneDayOnePerson. And so what is the #OneDayOnePerson movement that you started?
Honestly, I was just a lonely kid in university, and that's what started the idea. I started university at UFT, the University of Toronto Scarborough campus. I was there studying something that honestly I wasn't wholeheartedly passionate about. I made the decision to go to university based off my parents' opinions and also their expectations of me, as well as my own expectations of myself, because I saw thousands of kids around me all going to university right out of high school, so I figured it must be the right choice. And when I got there, it seemed like every single person was glued to their cell phones. I would walk through the hallways, and everyone's eyes were staring at Instagram feeds or TikTok videos. And I just really wanted to make some new friends. I was a student who took a 5th year and a gap year, so most of my friends would have been in different classes than me. They were also at different universities. I was starting my own post-secondary journey at a very different time. So I didn't know anybody. And I'm a pretty outgoing guy, or I like to think I am, but I found it very overwhelming to see like no one I knew and also everyone on their phones. And so I created a personal challenge for myself, called it One Day, One Person. And the challenge was to walk up to somebody and introduce myself to them every single day. Now, I only stayed in university for 2 months before dropping out and taking a very different entrepreneurial path. But while I was there following that challenge, I had the most amazing conversations and made some friends that I still talk to this day. And it all was kicked off by a video that I posted in one of the Facebook university groups. But that's a little bit about the One Day, One Person challenge and why I started it for myself.
So what was the biggest takeaway from you? What was the biggest learning lesson that you got from that challenge?
I think it's that every single person wants to meet new people. Like, you might be nervous right now, but deep down, you probably want to make new friends, especially if you're in a new situation, a new job, a new school, a new environment, a new country, right? You want to make new friends. And the reality is that every other person deep down also wants to make friends, right? I don't think anyone ever says, I don't want to meet new people and meet good human beings. Like, that just doesn't happen. And so because everyone shares that same desire deep down, one of the biggest takeaways I learned was that, talking to somebody else is actually benefiting yourself because you're making a friend, and it's benefiting the other person because deep down, everyone craves connection and attention. And I realized that because after getting through the awkward 15 first seconds of a conversation, when you're thinking to yourself, who the heck is this random person and why are they stopping to talk to me? After that awkward 15 to 30 seconds, you can start to build a real relationship, right? When we think about building relationships, even if it's not intimate, just with another person talking, it usually starts when you realize that in some way, shape, or form, you're related to them. And I don't mean in terms of your family, but in terms of your interests and in terms of the things you love and enjoy, right? There's relatability between the two of you. You share common interests or common hobbies. And when you discover those things through conversation, you start to build a relationship. But the crazy part is that the only way to discover the things you have in common is to talk. We're not telepathic. So you're going to have to walk up to the person and speak to them. And so to answer your question in a roundabout way, one of the biggest things I learned was everyone craves conversation. Everyone craves connection. You just have to get uncomfortable and get past the first 15 to 30 seconds when it's really awkward and weird, discover something that you share in common, and then, start building a relationship or friendship from there.
How do we get over those first, like sometimes that awkward phase is just so awkward that you don't even try, or you don't approach the next person, or you don't do whatever. How do you get over that first hump?
Yeah, the first 15 seconds of weird feelings.
Yeah.
I think it's the same way you get over anything. You go into it. Like there's no, I wish I could tell you there's some amazing trick that's going to make you confident. Like if you put your hair in a certain way, or, you know, you wore some jewelry or a watch, or, you know, you had some pickup lines. Unfortunately, it's not the case. The only way to get over the fear is to do it over and over and over again. I have a good friend of mine who has a stutter, a very severe stutter. His name's Jose. And he challenged himself to, in one day, go to the mall and ask 100 strangers for directions. And of course, he stutters while he talks. And he did it as a way to improve his speaking, but more so to boost his confidence. So I would say the only way to get over that fear is to do it over and over again. If you're so scared that you don't even want to do it the first time, I would say practice on friends and family. Put yourself in situations where you have to talk to people, like cashiers. So go and buy a $1 candy bar from the convenience store. And instead of just buying it in silence, use the person's name behind the cash register. Maybe ask them a couple questions. You know, oh, when did you open this? Are you the owner of this place? So whenever there's like an interaction with a waiter, whenever there's an interaction with a person behind the cash, go out of your way to make conversation. And you'll start to build up your confidence talking to those people in controlled situations, which will then hopefully get your confidence to a level where you have the ability to walk up to a stranger and introduce yourself on a college campus or something. And I'll end by saying, lastly, one of the best ways to introduce yourself to someone is either through a joking laugh, or like maybe there's something in the situation that's funny and you both are realizing it at the same time, or compliment the person. Hey, that's a really nice watch. Where'd you get that from? In a very casual way, of course. So I found both of those really helpful. And then also putting myself in situations where I talk to people just so that you flex that muscle of communication.
When, you know, we always have those conversations where in the middle of the conversation, it was going great and then it's just dead silent, right? You don't know what to say. They don't know what to say. How do you overcome that? Like, how do you make sure that you don't have those weird moments in conversations where it kind of abruptly ends or you're not too sure what to say?
Yeah, good question. I think it's like podcasting. The more present you are, the more you're paying attention to what the other person is saying. You could always pull another question out of their response. So be a good listener. I'd say be a fantastic listener. The better listener you can be, the better the conversation will be, because you'll ask the other person more meaningful questions. With that being said, something that I learned from a book called Something that I learned from a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People was that you want to be more interested in the other person than you are interested in yourself. So instead of saying, I'm so great, look how great I am, be interested in them. Oh, I noticed you're wearing a volleyball sweater. Do you play on the varsity team at the school? Or did you play growing up? You know, do you have dreams to one day play professionally? Do you have any siblings? Like, you know, based off, you know, this situation and environment you're in, depending on how close attention you're paying to that other person, you can pull like dozens of questions out of them. If it comes to a point where the conversation literally just dries up and is coming to a close, end with a call to action. Hey, I usually study here, you know, 3 times a week, 4 times a week. Maybe we share a similar class. You want to just exchange our Instagram handles real quick? And then you can start building a friendship, you know? So if it does dry up, just, you know, share information and part ways. But I would say if you're really interested in the other person, paying attention, you can have a never-ending amount of questions to ask.
So I like that last part where you're talking about like a call to action, right? So it's like the interaction doesn't just kind of stop, you know, at the small talk or when you just met that person for the first time, but you kind of make progress towards, hey, you know, let's study together, let's meet up afterwards, let's grab coffee, whatever it might be. And that kind of helps to make those deeper connections, right? But let's say that you're going and talking to 50 people, 100 people, or you're doing it every single day. At, you know, a certain point is going to come there. You have all these people that you're talking to, but you can't be like a really deep friend with everybody, right? So how do you kind of pick and choose the people that you want to stick around?
I think it's an intuitive feeling, to be completely honest with you. Like, I can't tell you why Lucas is my best friend and, you know, this other gentleman, John, is an acquaintance. I met them both randomly, but I felt a stronger connection to my buddy Lucas, and we both had more shared interests. We both were in similar stages of our lives. We're both entrepreneurs living in our parents' basements trying to build our dreams. So we had so many levels of similarity and relatability. So we were able to understand each other's lives a lot stronger than maybe a relationship I had with some other person that I met. And so I would say just listen to your intuition. You'll know when you hit it off with somebody. And I don't mean in an intimate way, just in a general relationship. Like, and you don't need to be best friends with everyone. You also don't owe anyone anything. The intention of the One Day One Person was to push myself out of my comfort zone and also know more people on campus. So when I'm walking the hall, someone might go, yo, what's up? Oh, man, I remember we talked to Tim Hortons 2 weeks ago. Yeah, man, how are you doing? Like, what's going on? And, some of those people I never talked to ever again. Others I saw 3-4 times a week, and a few of them became really close friends. So I would say there's not really a criteria to put people through to say, yes, this person I should spend time with, and no, this person I shouldn't. Just listen to your gut. And I would say a lot of the times it comes from similarities.
Something that I keep hearing from people, especially international students, when they're on campus, and this is a problem that they're facing, is that they feel like everyone already knows each other or has their own friend groups, especially in upper years, maybe not so much in first year, but definitely in upper years where everyone already has their own circles, and they're new, right? So what advice would you give to that person who feels like they're alone and everybody has everything figured out?
Yeah, I think the first thing is like, you're not the only one who feels alone. I think even people that have it figured out and seem like they have large groups of friends, some of them still deep down feel alone. They might feel like a placeholder in a large group of people that is just there because they have no one else to be around. Like, you never really know what anyone else is going through it or what anyone else is carrying. So what I would say to an international student that feels alone is, firstly, understand you're not the only one. There's probably other international students who also feel alone on your campus. I would say step 2, give yourself a personal challenge. Similar to myself, I didn't have any groups of friends on campus when I was starting university. Although I was in the younger years, so the classes had like 500 people in them, I would still go out of my way to, if I stand in line in a store, talk to the person behind me, talk to the person in front of me, make small talk with as many people as you possibly can. That will hopefully put you in a situation where you might, hit it off with somebody and start building a relationship. I would also say get involved in extracurricular activities. If you're not going to meet someone in class or in Tim Hortons in a lineup, you might meet them based off of a similar interest in a club or a hobby at the school campus. So I would say like that's something else I think is a little bit underrated. And I know academics gets this spot on the top of the pedestal, and we have to make sure we have super high grades, especially with international, parents. That's like a very high priority most of the time. But I would say make sure you don't disregard the activities where you can get involved, because I think that's where you build most of your deeper relationships in school.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think like the biggest value that university gives you is that it puts a bunch of like-minded people all together in one kind of space for a series of years, right? Where you're with them day in and day out. And so missing out on that and thinking that classes are where everything is happening is kind of a lost opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's so much to be learned and skills to be developed both in and outside of the classroom.
And so one of the things I kind of want to touch on that I thought was really interesting is that after 2 months, you decided to take an entrepreneurial route. What was it that kind of pushed you towards doing that? Was it something about the One Day One Person challenge? Was it meeting new people and having different perspectives? What was it that kind of pushed you to pursue something else?
Yeah, honestly, man, I always knew I didn't want to go to school. Like deep down, I just wasn't willing and ready to believe in myself and follow my intuition and think that it was possible for me to do so and actually make it work. When I was 17, I wanted to be a pro athlete. I busted up both of my knees, had 2 surgeries, lost a full ride soccer scholarship to a school in the U.S., went down a terrible path as a student. And that's when me and my buddies started Pick Waste, that organization where we we would go outside and pick up trash every Saturday morning with local students in our community. And we filled, just under 3,000 bags of trash. We did it for about 4 years. We still do it to this day. And in the second year of Pick Waste, it was just starting to grow, and I was beginning to speak at schools and get paid to speak and do keynote presentations at conferences about student leadership, volunteerism, and servant leadership and giving back. And every minute I spent in university class, my mind was never focused on the content. It was always focused on, how can I speak to more kids? How can I build this organization? How can I get more people involved? How can we fill more bags of garbage? How can I learn more about sales and marketing and speaking and build my skills? And after a month and a half, I just broke down crying in front of my laptop, called my parents, and was like, hey, I got to go. There's this thing I want to do. I want to speak full time. And if I don't do it now, then when am I ever going to do it? And so I was lucky that they allowed me to drop out of school, which is a funny thing to say. Like, we shouldn't be forced to do things. You know what I mean? But I was lucky enough that my parents allowed me to drop out and chase this dream and path. And I've been doing it full time now. I'm 22. I dropped out of school when I was 18. Things started to really get serious when I turned 19. And yeah, the sky is not the limit. The only limit that exists for any of you is what you put in your own mind. I think that's a really great thing to remind ourselves before we begin anything. And if your path requires post-secondary education, by all means, I'm not saying school is not the right choice. It just wasn't the right choice for me. So figure out what the path is that you want to go down and reverse engineer the steps. And if school's a part of it, then crush school and do an amazing job. And then call me in 4 years and be like, yo, Sam, it all worked out.
What gave you the courage to take that step? Like, what was it that gave you the courage to take the step where you didn't maybe necessarily have that courage beforehand?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I'm a little biased because things were starting to work before I left, right? I had done a TEDx talk. I'd been featured on the news for my work. I was starting to get paid, like, to speak at schools. So I knew that there was proof of concept. I have my first paycheck. It was like a couple $100 from Blythe Academy, which is like a private school. It was the first speech I ever did and got paid for. And the first time someone ever compensates you for something that you thought you could do and now it's a reality, you get some courage, because if one person is willing to pay you for it, the reality is that there's probably thousands upon thousands of people that would also be willing to pay you for it. So I would say step one was some proof of concept. The second part of the courage came from, I think, my competitiveness as an athlete. Growing up, athletics always taught me that if you want something in life, you have to work hard for it. I can't just wish that I get a better shot. I can't just wish that one day I'll wake up and I can jump higher. The only way to improve those skills is to go to a gym, lift weights, or go to a soccer field and kick a ball. And so from a young age, I was teaching myself, training for sports, that if you want something, there's a specific input that you need to sacrifice, that you need to put into something before you get a certain output. And I think what I'm using this story to explain is that I understood that it was possible. I would just need to figure out the correct input. I would just need to figure out what I needed to sacrifice, how much time I had to commit, and what I had to learn to make it work. And with that knowledge, it also felt a lot more accessible to me. I then took that understanding and just found as many people that I could that were youth speakers and called them. So I went on the first 5 pages of Google. I searched the word youth speaker and I called every single one. And I said, hey, I'm this kid. I just dropped out of school. This is what I want to do. I want to do exactly what you're doing. I have some questions for you. Can you answer them? And I actually have all the notes. They're also on my shelf up there. And that first set of phone calls exposed me to so many resources and pretty much everything I needed to start the business and get to where I am today.
What's the biggest thing that you learned from those phone calls?
If you don't ask, you don't get. I thought a lot of people weren't going to give me any time. All these big youth speakers who are always speaking at high schools 3-4 times a week, traveling in different countries. Almost all of them have their personal cell phone there. And if it isn't their personal cell phone, it's a gatekeeper, which is usually like an assistant. And if you get the assistant on the phone, you say, hey, I'm this young kid who really wants to learn from whatever the person's name is, and I would be so appreciative of 5 minutes of their time. I have 2 questions for them. almost always, if you're kind to that person on the other side of the phone line, they'll say yes. So I learned that if I didn't ask, I wasn't going to get anyway. And if I did ask and they said no, well, I didn't really lose anyway because I tried, and maybe I lost 30 seconds of my life, which is okay. So I'd say that was probably the biggest takeaway lesson.
Was like speaking or being a youth speaker, did this come naturally to you, or is that something that you had to like really work on, really perfecting your craft? Because like right now you're a very well-spoken person, so somebody might just look at the end result and say, oh well, hey, no wonder it worked for him because he's just good at it naturally.
Yeah. It makes us feel better when we assume that someone just is the way they are, because we feel like we can never reach that thing. It actually takes our responsibility out of the equation. But I understand how it's a natural thing that we sometimes do. And again, that's why I think it all comes back down to the limits we place on ourselves. The sky is not the limit. There are no limits. The only limits that exist are those that we place on ourselves. I sucked as a public speaker. I still have a video of my first ever presentation when I was 17. It was 3 minutes and it was in front of my high school. I was spitting all over the microphone, running back and forth. My hands were flailing everywhere. The video footage was terrible. I made no eye contact with anyone in the audience. I was like almost tripping over my legs because I was running so fast. It was terrible. And I practiced hundreds of times. I would practice in my shower because I didn't want my parents to hear me. And when the water was running, no one could really pay attention. I would practice in my basement. I probably practiced my TEDx talk over 120 times before I delivered it. I could probably wake up in the middle of the night and deliver it word for word, half asleep, and still not forget a beat. So I would say practice, practice, practice. I was not a good communicator when I first started. And the chances are the first time you tried a new skill, you probably sucked at it as well. And that's a natural thing to go through. It's a natural progression. At some point, though, your sacrifice and your time commitment and all those hours spent practicing has to be replaced with progress. It might not be perfection. It might not be, the best. You might not become the best communicator or speaker in the world, but you'll be better than when you first started. And if you just continue practicing, you'll never stop improving.
A lot of times with let's even take it back to university with class presentations, even a little group project, maybe you're just introducing yourself to somebody in your class. You get this anxiety that kind of builds up in you. It makes you forget your lines, makes you kind of close up. Your posture is not as open, and it makes your voice kind of come down. How do you have any tips for students in particular who might face this sort of social anxiety?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to understand that your anxiety comes from how much you care about the other people in the audience. So the reason you actually get anxious is because you care about your reputation and what other people think of you. And that's natural, and we all do. You get anxious because if you mess up, you think everyone is going to judge you in the audience. Here's the crazy part. Put yourself in the shoes of the audience for a second and ask yourself, when someone walks on stage to speak to you, are you subconsciously judging them and hoping that they fail? No, probably not, right? So, be at peace understanding that every time you step in front of an audience, just like yourself, everyone else who's sitting in that audience also doesn't want you to fail, and they're also not judging you. So that's like step number one. Step number two is understand what anxiety really is, which is the fact that you care. And then I would say step number three is practice. If you know you're going to be doing a class presentation or you're going to be introducing someone, there's nothing that's stopping you from going in your basement in front of a mirror in your house or anywhere and reading the intro 60 times before you do it the next day at school. So I would say those would be my three main tips. Practice whatever presentation you have to deliver. If it's improv, you don't really get a chance to practice, which is okay. I would say just focus on those first two tips, which are understanding that the audience isn't judging you and that you're only anxious because you care. And then pause. Try and practice intentionally pausing. If you forget your line, don't apologize because your audience never knows if you make a mistake until you say, I'm sorry. So instead of apologizing, just pause. reset, catch your thoughts, and continue.
Do you think that failure sometimes has a role to play with confidence and that social anxiety? Because just thinking from my personal experiences, there have been times where I just went up to present or to speak, or it was impromptu or whatever, and I just absolutely bomb, right? It's just terrible. I completely forget everything that I was about to say. But after those moments, I no longer cared because I was like, well, the worst has already happened. Do you find that to be true?
Well, yeah, let me ask you, what was the worst? What happened?
Nothing. I sat back down and then, I felt super embarrassed in the moment, and, I was feeling a lot of heat for those next 20, 30 minutes. But then after that, I kind of took a look around the room and everybody was, back to living their normal lives. No one probably even remembers it today.
Yeah. So we tend to exaggerate how bad things will be in our mind, which is why we get even more scared, which is why I do, like yourself, believe it's important to fail. Because once you fail and your mind then realizes that it wasn't really as bad as you thought it was going to be. And honestly, after you fail once, you're not really scared to fail again. And I think what's so important about that process is it proves your own mind wrong, which then instantly, I believe, makes you more confident because you know that even if it doesn't work out, everything's going to be fine. So instead of showing up anxious and nervous, you show up as your natural, authentic self. So yeah, I do believe that failure can be a learning lesson and is also a required step to improving any skill. Because if you never fail, you can't get any feedback on how to improve for next time.
Awesome. One thing that just randomly popped into my head, and so I want to switch gears just a little bit, go back to the, meeting new people and having those conversations with people. Sometimes you're talking to a person and it feels like, man, you are just carrying the conversation on your back, right? This person, they're not giving you anything. They're not really reciprocating, whether it be your excitement or your engagement. What do you do in those kinds of situations where it's almost like a failed conversation?
You just end it.
Just end it and move on?
Yeah, like here's a good example. Let's say I meet a girl and I'm super excited about her and I want to get into a relationship with her, and I ask her out on a date and we go on a date and the date goes terrible, like absolutely terrible. I'm carrying the entire date. I'm carrying the entire conversation. She's showing little to no interest. After dinner, if I made plans to go to the movie with her and I was going to tell her, hey, let's go watch a movie, I probably would decide at that moment, I'm no longer going to the movie. Like, hey, that was a great dinner. All the best. Thanks so much for coming out. Right? Well, it's the same with a generic conversation. Like at any point you can leave. Like you don't owe another person anything. I obviously wouldn't do it in a very disrespectful way. I wouldn't be like, you're boring. This conversation sucked. See you later. I would probably, get to a point where it seems like they're not interested in all and say, hey, anyway, it's been great chatting with you. Have an awesome day, and I'll see you around campus. And that's it. Like that's how I would end it. You know what I mean? I don't think you have to complicate it too much. If you're not enjoying it and it's very obvious that they're not enjoying it either, then just, hey, have a great day. I'll see you around type of response.
So I really like the mindset of you don't owe anybody anything. I 100% agree. Some people, though, they say, I do, right? I do owe people a piece of me, or they act that way. How can a person, get into the mindset or appreciate the fact that they come first and they don't owe anybody anything?
I think changing the group of friends you hang around with. So if you have friends that believe that you owe them things, whether it's your time, your energy, your money, then they're not really close friends, in my opinion. Like, all my friends appreciate me and I appreciate them because we both make mutual decisions to spend time together. But we all both know at any given moment, we can also say, hey, man, I got to go. There's something I got to do. And if my friend said, no, man, you owe me until 7 p.m., I'd be like, what? What do you mean I owe you till 7 p.m., man? I don't owe you nothing. Like, unless you have a contract with me, it says I have to speak with you every week for a certain amount of time, then yeah, okay. But outside of those weird cases, which hopefully you have no friends that make you sign contracts, you're friends with other people just out of your choice. Both of you decided you want to be friends, and both of you decided that you benefit from the relationship, and both of you decided you want to spend time together. So I would say, if you have friends that don't think that way and think you owe them things, get some better friends. That'd be like step one. Step two is to understand that time is the most important asset you have in the world. And, you don't realize that until a year flies by, and then 10 years fly by, and then 20 years fly by, and then you're looking back saying, wow, I wish I did what I really wanted to do. But instead I gave away my time to everything and everyone, except for myself. So I would say, understand that time is super valuable, and it's even more valuable than money, because you can get money back if you lose it, but you can never get time back after you spend it. I would say, take that belief to heart as well. And then thirdly, hang around people that really value their time. So not only leveling up your friends, but hang around people who are doing great stuff and also valuing their own schedule and their own time. Because when someone else says, hey man, I have a hard stop at 5:45, I don't, but if someone says I have a hard stop at this time, it's kind of like a signal to you, wow, this person has a hard stop. Like, what are they doing in their life? Like, that's kind of interesting and cool. So I would say find people that value their time, level up your friends, and also understand that time's your most important asset.
Awesome. So I have one last scenario that we asked to all of our guests, and so I want to get your perspective on it. So imagine that you're going on a hike, right? The goal of the hike, you want to reach the top of the mountain, the summit of this mountain. There's a bunch of things that you can bring with you on the hike that will help you reach that summit. For example, bring some hiking boots. It'll help you. Bring some poles, some snacks, water. These things, they help you on your journey to the top of the hike. Now imagine that this journey, that this hike is your life, right? And the top of this hike, that's the pinnacle of your achievements. Sam Demma has done all the speeches and connected with all the people that he wants. He's achieved all his dreams and aspirations, and that's kind of the peak of your achievements, right? What are some things that you would suggest to people, some characteristics that they should bring with them on this hike so that it can help them reach that summit of theirs?
3 things. And I'll give you broad examples and I'll explain. But the 3 things would be belief, like an insane amount of self-belief, relentless action, and a following of your own intuition. And I'll explain each of those in a second. If you're at the base of a mountain and you don't believe that you can make it to the top, like if you're at the base of the mountain and you just absolutely have no belief that you'll ever reach the top, there's a very small chance that you'll ever actually reach the top. Because if you don't believe it's possible, why would you even start? And if you're halfway up and you still don't believe it's possible, why would you ever finish? So an insane amount of self-belief is extremely important. I know this isn't a physical object. This is more of like a character trait. But I would say that would be like step number 1. If you don't have delusional belief in yourself, then no one else ever will. And no one else will ever invest in you. And you won't have the craziness to chase a huge mountain. It's like step 1. The second part is action, an insane amount of action, relentless action. You can't get to the top of a mountain unless you walk. And some mountains might take 20 days to climb, if we're talking like Everest or something like that. And that could be equated to like a massive goal in your life. So even if you had all the belief in the world, but you did nothing with it, nothing would ever change. So I would say having the pair of being extremely confident in your own self-belief, understanding that you have to take consistent action. I call it small, consistent actions every single day. That'd be like step number 2. And then the third is to follow your intuition. If you're climbing a mountain and you approach a fork in the path, one goes left and one goes right, how do you decide which path to take? Some people would say, I logically analyze the paths. One looks really rocky, one looks really smooth. I'm going to take the smooth path. Well, there's a lot of decisions in life where it seems like both paths are really great options. And at the end of the day, what helps you make the decision is your internal compass, your intuition, how you feel about the situation, something that you can't explain to others. I couldn't logically explain dropping out of university. I couldn't logically explain turning down joining a speaking bureau that was offering me a 10-year contract and a ton of money and opportunities. I couldn't logically explain why a month ago I woke up and wanted to make spoken word poetry, and I've never made a piece of poetry in my life. Those are all things that came from my intuition. And I think when it comes to chasing your dreams and goals in life, you have to have an insane amount of self-belief. Understand that it takes, tons of consistent action. And throughout the journey, you're going to have to follow your intuition, even if it makes absolutely no sense to those around you. And that might look like doing things that your parents don't like, your friends don't like, your aunts and uncles don't like, or may never understand. And that's okay, because it's your mountain. It's not theirs. So I would say those are like the 3 main character traits that I would take on the journey with me.
Awesome. So we have intuition, a bunch of action. You called it relentless action. I like that. And the very first thing that you talked about was, remind our audience again, it was belief. That's right. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today. If you want to, do you want to shout out your social medias and your website so that the people can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just Sam_Demma. That's DEMMA across all platforms. I also have a podcast called The High Performing Student, and you can find all that information on my website at samdemma.com. Would love to connect and chat anytime.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for tuning into today's podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to tune in next week for another episode. You can catch the full video podcast on YouTube. The full audio podcast is out on all platforms. Thank you.